Hey friends, today we're going to talk a little bit more about the position of the Earth as it rotates around the sun and the effect that that has on Earth's seasons. Now, on the student slides, you're going to notice that there are blank spots for you to type in missing keywords. So as I'm explaining the vocabulary terms and going through the slides, you fill in the blanks on your student slides. So you're probably going to have to go back and forth. I know this is kind of a pain, but I would go back and forth between two Chrome tabs, one with the student slides where you're typing in the missing words, and the other tab would be this video, of course. Okay, so the first slide is an opportunity for you to write what you recall from what we learned last week. What causes different parts of the Earth to have more or less sunlight throughout the year? So just whatever you think, whatever you recall from previous lessons or yesterday, type in this box on your student slides. So I would suggest pause this video while you do that and then come back to me. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how the rotation of the Earth affects temperatures and the amount of sunlight that different parts of the Earth receive. This line here that's going from side to side, the red line, is called the equator, and it divides the Earth into the northern hemisphere, which is the top part, and the southern hemisphere, which is the bottom part. So northern and southern hemisphere. And you can see that the sun's rays are beaming out from the sun and traveling through space to the Earth. And so areas close to the equator are getting more direct sunlight, and areas up at the top of the Earth by the North Pole and at the bottom of the Earth by the South Pole are getting indirect light, which has a lot less heat to it. So weather tends to be warmer closer to the equator and cooler at the poles of the Earth. Now notice that the axis of the Earth, which is this yellow line running north to south, this yellow line running north to south, up and down, it's not a straight up and down line. It's tilted. So if you imagined what the Earth's axis would look like if it did go straight up and down like a flagpole, and then you measured to tilt it about 23.5 degrees, that's about the tilt of the Earth's axis. As the Earth revolves around the sun, different parts of the Earth receive more or less direct sunlight. And that is what causes the seasons. Now, the equator divides the Earth into two hemispheres, the northern hemisphere, which is the top part, and the southern hemisphere, which is the bottom part. The northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere experience opposite seasons. We live in the northern hemisphere. People who live in the southern hemisphere, like in Australia, for example, they experience the exact opposite season of whatever we are currently experiencing. So here we can see that the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. So we are currently experiencing winter in the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere is tilted closer to the sun, getting more direct light, and so they are experiencing summer. So this is what it looks like when the northern hemisphere is tilted back towards the sun, getting more direct light and more heat. When the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, that's our summertime. Okay, so here's a diagram that shows you the seasons in the northern hemisphere. Remember, we live in the northern hemisphere. So you can see during fall and winter, the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. During spring and summer, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. Okay, which season is it currently, meaning right now, February 2nd, which season is it currently in the southern hemisphere? Remember, we live in the northern hemisphere. People who live in Australia live in the southern hemisphere. So what season is it for them right now? If you guessed summer, you're correct. The season currently in the southern hemisphere is summer. So, for example, in Australia, summer is currently ending. Starting in March, people in Australia will start to notice fall weather and patterns in nature because the southern hemisphere will be rotating away from the sun and getting less direct sunlight. This is a drag and drop activity. I want you to pause the video and drag these green text boxes to where they belong on the diagram. So orient yourself by looking at each diagram. Find the northern hemisphere where we live. When the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, temperatures will be cooler, like in winter and fall. When the northern hemisphere tilts back towards the sun, temperatures will be warmer, like in spring and summer. So drag those text boxes where you think they belong on the diagram. Okay, and then double check where you place them. Here we have fall and winter, these top two portions of the diagram, where the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, and then spring and summer, you can see the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. Let's learn about solstices and equinoxes. These are special days related to the seasons. Okay, so a solstice, the summer solstice, is the day that occurs each year when the sun is farthest north or farthest south of the equator. So the summer solstice is the first day of summer when the sun is the farthest north, and so the northern hemisphere is getting the most direct sunlight. And so the summer solstice is also the longest day of the year, which is June 20th. For us, this year, it would be June 20th, 2021. So scientists calculate when the summer solstice will occur each year by measuring the amount of sunlight that the northern hemisphere gets at the top of the Earth, the North Pole. Now, the winter solstice is the start of winter. It's when the sun is the farthest south. And so the winter solstice is the day of the year when the northern hemisphere gets the least amount of direct sunlight that it will get all year. And therefore, it's the shortest day of the year. So for us this year, that will occur on December 21st, 2021. You can remember the meaning of the word solstice by looking at this root word here, S-O-L, sol, at the beginning. Whenever you see that root word sol, it's usually referring to something related to sunlight or the sun. Okay, now let's learn about the equinoxes. This root word here, E-Q-U-I, equi, or equal, sounds like equal. Whenever you see words that have this root word, you should think, okay, it's related to something being balanced or equal. So the equinoxes are days when we have equal amounts of daylight and nighttime, 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. The vernal equinox is the beginning of spring. You can remember vernal because the word vernal usually refers to something that is fresh or new. And in the springtime, with all the new growth and new life that's happening, things are fresh and new. So the vernal equinox is the first day of spring. For us, that will occur on March 20th, 2021. The autumnal equinox is the beginning of autumn, and that will occur on September 22nd in 2021.